Hello and welcome to the Priori podcast, episode 8. I'm the editor, Kestell Duxbury, and in this episode we're going to be discussing Traingate, NHS Patient Safety Gate, and Farage on a platform with Trump sums up all that is wrong with modern day politics, and how GCSE students have become politicised. So, to start off this week, there has been a big issue in the Labour Party, because what seems to have happened is the Tories went through this issue of having a Prime Minister who was standing aside, resigning, because he could not convince the British people that staying within the European Union was the best thing. Then what happens is we have a number of other resignations because of people who feel that they haven't done their job effectively. You have Nicola Sturgeon saying that, well, Scotland voted to stay in, I've done my job, what are you doing down there in London? There was some turbulence. There were a few people who got out unscathed. I think we can safely say that Theresa May got out unscathed. The Labour Party were the only, well, I say only, they were the major party that was trying to persuade the British people to stay within the European Union. That was decided at the National Executive Conference last September, and that was Jeremy Corbyn's first conference. Now, whoever the leader was going to be, that was going to be where that was having to be the number one priority, making Labour credible again, and really voting on the EU, get people out there, get people in that ballot box, and get people putting yes. And unfortunately, what ended up happening was the complete opposite. Well, not the complete opposite. It was 52 to 48%. There were difficult signs. Now, Jeremy Corbyn, he's a very principled man. I don't think anybody would ever put that past him. He's fundamentally a good guy. And I think anybody within the Labour Party, even those who don't think he's a particularly good leader, are never going to say that Jeremy Corbyn is not a nice person or a horrible man. He's unwise. He's unwise as a leader. Now, there are a few factors that have militarised his tenure, basically. The first thing was Jeremy Corbyn, for whatever reason, well, for a number of reasons, has had this swelling of people's appetite for the Labour movement. It actually isn't that difficult to see why. We can see that there are people who have gone to the Greens. 2.2 million people voted for the Greens at the last election. The Greens were going to suffer heavily with Jeremy Corbyn's nomination. But I don't think they would have been too worried. They would prefer to have shared a platform there. Caroline Lucas has already put forward that she would quite happily have a cross-party, a cross-party coalition with Jeremy Corbyn at the helm. And of course, she's going to support Jeremy. He's put forward some roles that I think have to be discussed, and that's fine. And I don't think anybody's really worried about that. And again, I don't think people are necessarily too worried about why, fundamentally, why Jeremy Corbyn has been popular. He's gaining votes, and even the MPs who put him forward, who said that maybe they wouldn't be the person I would vote for, but he's still somebody I'm going to put forward because I think their views are relevant in the party, were right. We're absolutely right to, and that time has been and gone. But moving back to the EU referendum very, very quickly. Jeremy Corbyn failed to win over the British people. He failed to win over some of the Labour members, to be honest. And whether you think his job as Labour leader, I'm going to put it this way. The job of a leader is to promote the party's interests first and foremost. I don't for one second believe that David Cameron fundamentally believes absolutely every policy that has been put forward by the Tories. And I think most people would go with that. He's not a policymaker. He never was. He's done some research in it, but fundamentally he's been climbing that greasy pole to the top. Now, he was almost willing to say whatever, and he was that guy. He was the future because he was willing to do that. Now, whether you want your politicians to be like that or not is actually is almost a moot point, because that's how they are. And you kind of have to take the rough with the smooth. It's how modern politics is. You have media training these days because you can't slip up. You can't say the wrong thing. Look at what Gordon Brown did with Gillian Duffy. These people fundamentally are being watched, and they don't have a day off in 5 years. And when people talk about politics pay and stuff like that, 70 grand to never turn off, I think is a lot. Is not enough. It's an unpopular viewpoint, but that's the viewpoint I have. So that's one thing. Jeremy Corbyn has turned off. Jeremy Corbyn's turned off. When he said he would stay within the European Union between 7 and 7.5 out of 10, Jersey, it's not good enough. It really isn't good enough. You're meant to be leading us, and it's so frustrating. It's so frustrating as a member to see the party fall like this, and it's very, very disconcerting to see a leader, somebody with so much to give, be attacked in this way. Now, the reason that I bring this up is because we have had this thing in Britain called Traingate, which unfortunately nowhere near as exciting as the proper Watergate scandal, but it's I don't want to use swear words, but it's daft. It really is effing daft. Basically, Jeremy Corbyn released a video on a train talking about the renationalisation policy that he puts forward under his leadership. Fine, absolutely fine. And he did that quoting that he was on a packed train going from London to Newcastle. And people were fine with that. People were like, okay, whatever. Under the radar, who cares? Then what happens is Richard Branson, the head of Virgin Trains, the head of the company that the train was being operated by, Virgin Trains, Richard Branson, billionaire, currently on his holiday, released a video with the CCTV footage of Jeremy Corbyn walking past many, many empty seats. Now, why is this significant? Well, it actually, in the grand scheme of things, is not. But what it shows is a fundamental lack of understanding of the political machine. This is the thick of it all over again. This is people making rookie errors. Now, this is why I've run myself into a bit of a tirade against the Canary of late. For those who aren't aware, the Canary is a magazine, an online magazine similar to the Priori, but they are very whipped. They are whipped by their editor, whose name escapes me. Not an evil person or that, but they're whipped to a point where when you submit a piece, it then has to conform with the rest of the pieces. You then have to edit other pieces. That's just the way it is, and that's fine. That works for them. No issue. But what they have ended up doing is being editorially whipped into becoming I'm not going to say hard left, but a left-wing clickbait machine. Now, what I mean in terms of clickbait is they will write a headline in order to get people to click on it, because that's how they're generating revenue. Now, people may call that cynicism. People may say, actually, they are just speaking the truth. They are just speaking the truth, Kez. They are purely trying to win over that side of the news that isn't being portrayed. And Jeremy's actually a good guy. Fine. But the way that their business structure is purely based on the amount of clicks on an article. So therefore, when they say the mainstream media are wrong, they are against Jeremy, what every Jeremy Corbyn supporter is going, like, share. That is a godsend to the Canary. And unfortunately, it's just the way it is. I'm not going to try and tell you it's any other way, because it ain't. That is just the way it is. However, it's not necessarily the way it has to be. And also the Canary really has taken a bit of and There was a good point made by the Canary, and I'm not going to say everybody working for the Canary is somehow evil. But what has happened is somebody has then said, why would Richard Branson want to make this a story? Well, the reason Richard Branson wants to make it a story is because he has business interests that are fundamentally under threat under a Labour policy. He is purely highlighting the PR scandal gone awry. It was a null and void point. The point that he was sat on the floor was actually irrelevant. He could have made that point on any peak hour train going from London to Finsbury Park, for example. It was an easy thing to do. And to highlight that you're sat in a gantry, and then for him to then say that he was looking for a seat with his wife and that's why he couldn't sit down, actually shows how out of touch he is. Because the normal commuters do have to split up, and people do not sit together if you don't reserve seating. It's just the way of the market sometimes. Reserve your seat. This is how real people live. And I'm not going to have a big beef about Jeremy Corbyn, and then I'm going to run on about Owen Smith, because Owen Smith is literally a bag of air. He's doing absolutely nothing different. He's not really promoting any more credibility. He's not really presenting himself as any more noble. This is what is fundamentally wrong with the British political machine in terms of what we now have is this Corbynista against what's called the moderation, and that isn't quite right, because the Corbynistas have militarised to say that everybody is against them. He is being led by momentum rather than being led by people from the actual party. Those people were let go on or left under when Jeremy was elected. It ain't gonna work, unfortunately, mate. The Malcolm Tuckers of this world exist because they're good at their job. The moment you replace them with late 20s, politically naive, maybe slightly too idealistic people, is when it is all going to go wrong. And I don't want us to be the end of Jeremy. And I think he has a long life in policy and things like that left. And his voice had to be heard at that leadership election. The problem is that he's been led poorly. He's surrounded by people who are not doing what's in his interest, which is detrimental to him, aka advising him to sit on a train when it's absolutely unnecessary. And I genuinely don't believe that the best thing for Jeremy at this moment in time is to basically try and ostracize him, basically put himself as an alternative candidate, because it's not really what he is anymore, and that is a shame. He isn't an alternative candidate. What he is instead is somebody trying to fight against the stubbornness. He didn't whip his own vote for the CND vote. Sorry, not CND, but the Trident renewal vote. That should have been whipped. That's quite an easy thing to whip. He didn't want to do that. And there is a book that I've mentioned a few times on this podcast called How to Beat a Government Whip by Helen Jones. And she basically says that Jeremy is not the person you could whip. He is not whippable. And I think that speaks volumes for the sort of person Jeremy is in politics. He's extremely principled and he will go that way. It's just sort of the way it is, and that's fine. And I don't want to call him politically naive. He's been in the game a long time, but he has been on the fringes. He's not been in the mechanics of the machine before. And he's struggling, and what he genuinely needs is some leadership of his own. Get some media leadership in there. The way that he operated his the EU referendum canvassing, basically, and his when he was walking around talking to people, you had to pull out Gordon Brown. Alan Johnson was doing a crap job. Ed Balls, I don't know why the hell he was brought back out again, but he was, as was Ed Miliband. These people are the past. These are the past of the party. Why are you bringing these people out? The fact that Tony Blair and Gordon Brown had to get involved, it just shows how lacking we are for strong leaders. And this is why I think the country would resonate a bit more with Dan Jarvis. I think he has that story, which is, without wanting to be too personal for Dan Jarvis, because he's a really interesting guy, and I would suggest at least giving him a wiki look. His wife died. He was in the military for a number of years, where I believe he was a captain or a major, but he was high up in the army. He has that authority. The only thing that holds him back politically is he is from Nottingham and represents Barnsley. And there are still some issues within the Barnsley community because the Nottingham miners didn't support the Barnsley miners in the miners' strike. So there is still some animosity there. But I think bygones be bygones if this man is gonna be effective at a general election. He would be the person that I would vote for if he was on the ballot. He's not. I hope he is soon. For the sake of being a Labour member, that's who I would want on the ballot. But that's not the case. Do I think Jeremy Corbyn's unelectable? He is at the moment. The sort of company he's with, he has either got to go or he's got to change his company. This shouldn't happen. You shouldn't be there with less than a year and be in this position. And I just feel that Jeremy Corbyn's got an awful lot to offer the party, and he's done none of it. And it's going to become lame duck, and the party's going to become lame duck, and that's the way I see it. And I think Owen Jones, as I said, opportunistic bag of air. But I think in my absolute deepest of hearts, do I see there being a Prime Minister Corbyn before being a Prime Minister Smith? Well, I probably don't. I think probably Owen Smith has a slightly better chance on that stage. But he might drive away those members. But I think, again, Chuck O'Meara made this fantastic point, which was Jeremy Corbyn ignored an 80% vote of no confidence. None of us would be able to get away with that at our workplaces. You can't. Like, if you're a manager and you can't relate to 80% of your employees and they've got a vote of no confidence, you are doomed. You are doomed as that person. So that was one thing. And then you are then looking at the next stage, which is, he said, well, I've got this mandate that was given to me when I won my leadership election. X amount of people have joined because of it. And he goes, Jeremy, we have the mandate of the 9.8 million people who voted for Labour. And I think the Democrat in Jeremy Corbyn has been eroded ever so slightly by this sort of hunger and this, I don't want to call it but people have definitely seemed to see that Jeremy Corbyn is almost entitled to go on unchallenged and just create Labour policy, and that isn't the choice, that isn't the decision of a leader. There are policies that are totally unworkable, one of which is complete renationalisation of the NHS. In real terms, who is going to make your nitrile gloves? Who is going to make or who is going to dispose of the sharps bins? Who can do that more effectively, the state or the private sector? There has to be a slight amount of realism. You can't say that all private money in the NHS is bad. It just needs to be regulated, exactly the same with the railways. If Virgin are producing a particularly shite service and you aren't regulating the ticket prices, well, funnily enough, that's down to regulation, not down to who owns it. And this is what's so frustrating about Labour Party being a Labour member. You can't seem, you're looking on willfully and going, if you want to be voted in, I need you just to get some policies that everyone can get behind, and let's move forward and challenge the government. The second thing I wanted to talk about, or what is wrong with politics today, and everything that's wrong with politics, is there was a leaked document coming from the civil service about Jeremy Hunt's plans for a 7-day NHS. Not that the NHS wasn't 7-day before. He has now forced through a contract for junior doctors to mean that within their contract, they have to work 7 days on shift patterns. Which I think most people would go, well, that's fair enough. The problem is he then took money off them. And that, funnily enough, doesn't go down too popular. And I think the junior doctors have had support of large swathes of the population, even very, very. The problem is in this country, the NHS is not seen as socialism. It's not seen as socialised medicine. It's seen as a right of being a British citizen. So the NHS is very protected like that. The Tories wouldn't, not even Thatcher would dare to touch the NHS. So that's the way it is. Any form of changes can look unwise and X, Y, Z, number of reasons. But the reason that I want to bring this up is because the sheer amount of media coverage it hasn't had, because we've been talking about Traingate. And it shows two things. The first thing is that we have a predominantly right-wing press. The second thing is that these people have an interest. And the third thing is that gossip sells. I think the fears of a 7-day NHS were widely known well before anybody had seen this document. I don't think it was breaking news. It's just the way it is, really. But it's important. It's really, really important to the British people to know, to understand what the civil service were thinking. The civil service is huge. There's 400,000 people work for the British service. And there were concerns voiced and they were ignored by the government. That's important. If there are voices being concerned by your legislative body, basically, the civil service are the people who actually put together the legislation and policy and implement it, and those concerns were just damn right ignored, you have to wonder at what the Tories are going to do next, because they are basically blindly muddling through whatever policy they want. Now, the gossip side of that, when I say about the Traingate fiasco, is that because these are already known, it doesn't really make news, and it isn't really happening. This was something found in the past, and it didn't really have a direct effect. Everyone knew that Jeremy Hunt was his surname with a replaced first letter. We just knew that's the case. He really messed up the B Sky B takeover. We knew his interest there, and he did a similar sort of thing. What Cameron basically did was he used Jeremy Hunt as a scapegoat. We knew what he was like, and he was a... You could just throw stuff at him. In the same way Michael Gove. Michael Gove was a man to get unpopular policy and get it through. Prison reform and legal aid and the academy reform hasn't all been bad, but there have definitely been bad things. And we'll talk about in a minute, the GCSE results have fallen because of these policies. But beside the point for the time being, what we are going to say though is that we do have a right-wing press, and whilst I think most educated people do know that, when we are talking to readers of tabloids predominantly, and people do read The Sun and stuff like that, and fair enough, I would prefer people had some news than no news. I'd prefer people aren't completely ignorant and actually want to take a semi-interest in what is happening in the world, even if they just want to know about the football transfer news, so be it. But excuse me if you're hearing a lot of different noises. I'm just packing my bag. I'm off to London this evening. The thing is, the influences are widely known about where the interests are and the bias for the Tories. That would have got buried very, very, very deeply. It hasn't been buried very, very deeply by The Guardian and the Independent, people like that, because they never do. They're quite keen to do that investigative journalism and stuff like that, and they aren't really heavily governmentally biased. They do have biases, of course, but they tend to be quite good in recent years at really pulling the all three parties actually to account. So you can't really moan at any of them. But the BBC didn't pick up on it, and this is what's slightly worrying, because the gossip isn't popular. And I had to explain this the other day to my stepfather. Every time something, even what the BBC produces, goes online and gets reshared and reshared and reshared, it's making them money. And we need to understand that our news medias these days do have to make money. That's why earlier on the BBC News, I was Harry Wraith Arthur, who you'll know from the Priori and other podcasts and stuff like that, he showed me that his fourth most popular article on the BBC News was the most disgusting words in the English language, and the headline was moist. And you're sat there and going, yeah, because it's tosh, and people don't want to know about the serious stuff because they feel that there's very, very little they can do about it. So that's worrying, and that's the political state we're in. But that is kind of what it is, and you kind of have to do what you can do about that. And I think the one thing we can do is keep talking about it. So I know the Angry Voice did a really good piece. Of course, he's a little bit more Corbyn. So he said, why are we talking about Traingate? We should be talking, well, actually, you should be talking about both, because it shows that there are deficiencies in the parties, in all the parties. So that was that's another thing that has that is showing us that, and that is showing why politics is in a dire state of affairs. The third and final thing is that Nigel Farage was on the stage with Donald Trump last night at the Republican, at a Mississippi rally. This Mississippi rally happened to have an entry fee of $775. That is a lot of money. When when they want to talk about working family and stuff like that, you gotta wonder how many of these people are really doing the sort of blue collar jobs that the Republicans really really like to think they are doing, because they're not. These are very, very wealthy people, and there are very wealthy people in both parties, and there's very, very wealthy people in American politics. They've basically managed to legalize fraud by having the type of system they do. But anyway, that's for another time maybe. The reason that this shows why politics in and of itself is in a bad state is because Nigel Farage shared a platform with this man and said that you would have to pay him to vote for Hillary Clinton. Yet he claims that he did not say that he's endorsing Trump. Now, if he's not endorsing Trump, what the hell is he doing at a Trump rally? And you've got to go that politicians these days are struggling to speak their minds. Even Nigel Farage, one of the most outspoken people on the circuit, is having to really contain what he wants to say. And it's really sad, and it's slightly sad because even Owen Jones makes like some whimsical joke within context, and the Canary completely rip him apart for it. And it isn't very fair, to be honest, because all these people are human beings to a point. But it's more showing. I'm not going to, because I seem slightly hypocritical saying that Jeremy isn't polished enough and being given bad advice, to then saying that these people are human beings and should be given a bit of slack. The fundamental of this is that there is so much media interest in our politicians that we can't really escape it. And we can't really escape that anything political is basically driven by the want and need of this political machine and the media machine to want to make a big deal about it in order to promote its interests and sell more papers. And the Canary does exactly the same thing. It's basically just doing it on the wrong side for once. So often the mainstream media are going to attack Jeremy because they're hard left. Well, he isn't really, is it? He's just... But anyway, he has some unworkable principles. But apart from that, he's not that hard. They want to attack him because he wants to attack their way of life and things like that. And that's fair enough. They get to sell stuff like that. But for the first time ever, you've now got somebody shouting from the other side and being promoted by 500,000, well, a couple of 100,000 Corbyn supporters on Facebook. It's working well for them. But it's sad to see how the media is constantly tearing this apart. I do think what we do at the Priori a bit more is really give you a bit more analysis of it to make your own decision. And that's kind of how I'd want my news to be laid out. And this is why the BBC's pro-government stance doesn't work for me. I'd want them to be entirely neutral and balanced, which is unworkable because people always have a bias, and it's just trying to get that bias somewhere in the middle. But anyway, the final thing I'd like to talk about in this week's podcast is the GCSE results. As I mentioned, Michael Gove brought in some reforms, turning all schools into academies. This was going to be the thing. And my girlfriend's a firm supporter of this. She thinks academisation actually works for a lot of schools. The way they've done it and the way they've dangled the financial carrot of security has been... It's not the way she would like to have done it, but she said actually academisation can produce some really good school reports. It gives schools some independence and some flexibility, and it's given them a bit of independence. The issue with that is that we're meant to be delivering a basic standard of education for every child in the land. That's less likely to happen. It doesn't mean academisation can't work, but it's struggling. Now, the one bit of policy that has affected the GCSE results that came out today, which is the 25th of August 2016, is it's the first time that the results have gone down. A 2.1%, the A star to C range has dropped to 66.9. So 2/3 of GCSE kids are getting them. Now, the reason being is this is the first year that people who didn't get it the year before have been forced to redo until they get an A star or C in English and maths. Now, this is because they're basically saying employers want qualifications. I don't think they're wrong, but this is the first time we're actually going to see the real meat of how these policies work. And it's probably the first real reminder to a lot of people who weren't maybe affected by welfare cuts and judicial reform, and maybe not the very, very poorest, but it's going to be the first time that there will be somebody who's dyslexic and struggles with English who's going to have to keep going back. Now, this could have a real effect on the middle class families, because for the first time ever they can go, oh dear, we weren't expecting Jenny or Oliver to have to do this. And it puts a lot of stress on kids. They're so right, employers do want qualifications. And I'm slightly more laissez-faire to the point of going, they do need qualifications, and when they realise they do need qualifications, you can go back and get a GCSE in 3 months when you're 21, because it's so much easier then. You're so much more eloquent, you've had so much more time to absorb the world, and all of a sudden you can read that book and these terms can fly at you, and you've learned how to learn, basically, and you're not trying to do it with 30 other kids, you can do it at your own pace. So I think it's going to have some detrimental effects. I don't think it's necessarily bad in principle, but the way it's working in practice is going to have some difficulties on those families. I would talk more about the US election and stuff like that, but I'm trying to keep it as concise as I can this week. I'm actually moving to London this week, and I'm planning on getting some really exciting guests in the next couple of weeks. Jack Layton, who's a regular contributor, is just finishing his master's dissertation. Harry Wraith Arthur is just finishing off. He'll be back with me in a couple of weeks. I've also got a friend of mine, Andrew, who's an entrepreneur. I'd like to talk to him about how his politics background has helped him become an entrepreneur. And again, I'm still going to push this. I'm still trying to get Tom Moynihan over from Sheffield. I'll have Ben Walters as well, and we're probably next week or the week after going to talk some more about the real implications of Brexit and whether it's actually going to happen. But anyway, thank you for joining me, and I will see you again next week, which will be in September by that time, won't it? How exciting. So, right, I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Priori podcast. There is going to be a new podcast next week and the recurring weeks after. The only thing I would like to say is I am going to start writing an A to Z of politics. And this is going to be an hour-long podcast each week on the different aspects of political theory. If anybody would like to help out or do some voiceover recording, then you're more than welcome. If you send me an email or comment or share or like or whatever you do on these podcasts, then let me know. And I'm hopefully going to get that going in the new year. So thank you very much, and I'll see you again next week. Okay, cheers, bye.